Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex history, dense research, and some really surprising facts, and distill them into the knowledge you need fast.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we are diving deep into a moment in history that often gets summarized or maybe glossed over a bit too quickly.
Yeah, it really does.
We're talking about the critical and frankly brutal transition from slavery to emancipation in Jamaica, specifically between 1834 and 1838.
And our mission for this deep dive is really to analyze the sources from that period because they reveal a truly a shocking reality that greeted formerly enslaved people on August 1st, 1834.
Right.
You might think of 1834 as the end of bondage, but our sources show us exactly why true unfettered freedom just wasn't immediate, and why the struggle for liberty had to enter this difficult and really violent new phase.
The central narrative here is one of, well, profound systemic betrayal. I mean, just think about the atmosphere leading up to that famous date.
The anticipation must have been incredible.
Exactly. Based on reports from abolitionists, sermons from missionaries, the general belief was that the British Parliament had finally acted. Enslaved people across the island had every reason to anticipate absolute liberation on that day. They were ready for the dawn of freedom.
But when that long-awaited morning came, the discovery was devastating. They found that slavery hadn't truly ended.
How so?
Well, the British government, it was just unwilling to lose control over the colonial labor economy. So they engineered a system where only the name of bondage had changed.
And this scheme was the notorious Apprenticeship System. Okay, let's unpack this system. The one that came to be known by people at the time as the False Dawn. Because instead of full, immediate, unconditional freedom, the British government, through the Emancipation Act of 1833, implemented what they call, a very bureaucratic way, a phased approach.
And this is where the political spin is just fascinating. The official justification, the sort of palatable story used to sell this plan to the British public and the plantocracy, it was rationalized as a necessary, measured step. It was designed to ease the transition from chattel slavery to a functioning, free labor economy.
So the idea was what? That they needed to be taught how to be free.
Essentially, yes. The idea was that the formerly enslaved people needed time to, learn the habits of free work and self-sufficiency. It's incredibly paternalistic.
But if we look at the reality on the ground, that justification, it just rings immediately false, doesn't it? This system quickly proved itself to be nothing more than forced labor.
Oh, completely. It was a bridge built not toward freedom, but, toward continued economic control by the planters.
So it was a failure from the start.
A failure because it satisfied no one. The formerly enslaved people understood instantly that this was not true liberty, and they deeply resented it.
And the planters?
Well, the planters, while they begrudgingly accepted the free labor part, still felt they had lost full, unmitigated control. So there was intense resentment on their side as well.
It sounds like a classic example of a colonial power trying to preserve profit over dignity. Wanting the optics of emancipation without the economic consequences.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So if the stated goal was to ease the transition, did the sources indicate any actual success in that, or was the violence and control just baked in from day one?
The sources are pretty conclusive. The violence was baked in. The system's entire premise that freedom had to be earned through more unpaid labor for your former master, that guaranteed conflict. It wasn't designed to uplift, it was designed to maintain the old hierarchy.
Okay, so let's stop talking about the justification and dive into the actual mechanics of it all. This is the nitty-gritty detail that earned the apprenticeship system that damning label, slavery by another name.
Yes. And the duration of the commitment itself tells you everything you need to know.
It wasn't the same for everyone, was it?
No, not at all. The terms were cynically different based on the kind of labor you did. Those categorized as domestic workers were bound for 4 years.
Okay, so their apprenticeship would end in 1838.
Right. But the field laborers, and this is the vast majority of the workforce, the people making the sugar economy profitable.
Of course.
They were bound for 6 years. 6. The intended end date was 1840.
1840. That's an eternity when you believed freedom was already yours. But the staggering injustice, it lay in the core labor requirement, right?
It did. Apprentices were legally required to work 40.5 hours per week.
That's a full-time job.
More than a full-time job, and for their former owners. And here's the kicker. This work came with absolutely zero wages. Zero pay for over 40 hours of mandated labor.
And this is where the mechanisms of control and the economic trap just snap into place.
Exactly. It wasn't just the unpaid labor. The planters kept the power of physical enforcement. The sources confirm that flogging, other harsh physical punishments, they continued to be used routinely.
So the end of slavery did not mean the end of systematic brutality.
Not at all. It was simply codified under this new legal framework.
And what about movement? Were they free to go?
No. There were huge restrictions on movement. Apprentices still couldn't leave the estates without permission, which, effectively meant they were still tethered to the plantation.
The same physical space of their enslavement.
They're the very same. But the truly cruel twist was the economic hardship.
Okay, explain that.
Because they were mandated to work those 40.5 hours for free, they were no longer provided with the basic necessities, food, shelter, clothing, things that masters had been legally, if, minimally required to provide under slavery.
Wait, hold on. So the employer required all this free labor, but then offloaded all responsibility for the worker's survival onto the worker's own limited free time.
Precisely. The apprentices now had to find additional paid work during their limited free time, so Saturday afternoons and Sundays, basically just to earn money.
For what? For food?
For food, for rent on the shacks they already lived in, for basic necessities. It was an absolutely vicious cycle. Any time you spent trying to earn money to survive was time taken away from rest, family, or growing your own food.
That number, 40.5 hours for free, that becomes the master key to the whole economic trap.
It is.
It's a complete guarantee that an apprentice couldn't save money, couldn't relocate, couldn't build an independent life. It ensured total dependence.
Total dependence and ongoing, debilitating poverty. And the sources show this immediate, overwhelming feeling of betrayal sweeping across Jamaica. People realized they'd been handed a piece of paper that promised freedom but delivered renewed bondage.
So the struggle had to pivot.
It had to. It moved from a legislative fight in London to a battle of everyday defiance right there on the estate.
And this defiance is fascinating.
Yeah.
As frustration boiled over, this wasn't just passive resistance, was it?
Yeah.
It was tactical.
Very tactical. The formerly enslaved people, they refused to just accept this system. We see widespread instances of non-cooperation, organized slowdowns, feigning illness, or just flat out refusing to work extra hours.
So they were using the bare minimum of legal compliance as a kind of shield.
Exactly. But they also turned to the system itself to fight back. Many apprentices, often with guidance from missionaries, started challenging the abuses of their former masters in the new magistrates' courts.
They were suing their former masters.
In a way, yes, trying to use the limited legal framework to fight unfair punishments or wage disputes.
How often did that actually work? I mean, was the deck completely stacked against them?
Oh, the deck was heavily stacked. The magistrates were often former military men or plantation owners themselves. They very rarely sided with the apprentices.
But the act itself.
The act of challenging the authority, of dragging the master into court, that in itself was a powerful statement of refusal. It showed that the former chattel were now active, legal agents, not just property.
But there was another method of escape, one that highlights just the cruel, almost unbelievable irony of the situation.
Yes. Individuals could petition to have themselves appraised and then allowed to purchase their own freedom.
Purchase their own freedom.
Yes. It was an impossible burden. I mean, think about it. These were people who had toiled their entire lives without ever being paid. They had been deliberately kept from accumulating any wealth. And now, suddenly, they were expected to produce a huge lump sum of cash to buy back their own liberty.
From the very men who had profited from their bondage for generations.
The sheer audacity of it is just staggering.
So how did anyone manage it? I mean, the sources must document these heartbreaking efforts.
They do. It required immense sacrifice. Individuals would take on every single extra bit of labor they could find in their free time, working every Saturday afternoon for months, sometimes years.
Cutting into any moment they might have had for rest, or just being with their children.
And it often became a collective effort. Families were the bedrock. Relatives would pool their meager resources, sacrificing everything they had just to liberate one member.
And in some cases, it went beyond family, right? It became communal.
Yes. Entire communities would gather funds, organizing collections to liberate the most vulnerable, maybe an elderly person, or a mother with young children. It speaks volumes about the solidarity required just to access a basic human right.
Were there other sources of help?
A few received crucial aid from abolitionist networks and missionaries. They would raise money in Britain or lobby magistrates to get a fairer appraisal value. But the tragic conclusion is that, for the vast majority, the cost of their freedom was just. It was tragically out of reach. They were locked in, waiting for 1840.
Meanwhile, this immense struggle happening on the ground in Jamaica, it wasn't taking place in a vacuum. It started creating a tipping point when the reports of the injustice, the details of the violence, made their way back across the Atlantic.
This was heavily driven by the missionaries. They were often the only white observers who weren't directly invested in the plantation system.
And they were writing letters.
Writing letters, providing detailed, verifiable testimony. They detailed the floggings, the near starvation, the unjust sentences handed down by the magistrates.
And this created outrage in the British public. Many of the people who had championed abolition in 1833 suddenly felt betrayed.
Deeply betrayed. They realized that the millions of pounds their government had spent as compensation for slave owners had not bought true freedom for the formerly enslaved. It was, as they put it, not the freedom they had envisioned.
And that moral outrage, that created real political pressure.
Immense pressure. It became so intense that Parliament was forced to launch official investigations into the colonial conditions. They sent out commissioners to interview witnesses to see for themselves.
And what did they find?
The findings were absolutely damning. They confirmed what the apprentices and missionaries had been saying all along. The system was rife with abuse.
So the whole idea of easing the transition was just revealed to be a complete sham.
The whole narrative just crumbled. It was resistance in Jamaica, coupled with relentless pressure from abolitionists in Britain, that finally tipped the scales.
So even though the field laborers were scheduled to endure this until 1840,
the British government was forced to act early.
In 1838, the entire apprenticeship system was abolished. Full, absolute legal freedom to all formerly enslaved people in Jamaica.
A massive victory, but one that was bought at the cost of 4 grueling, brutal years.
The lesson here seems profound. It moves beyond just the dates in a history book. The struggle for freedom didn't just conclude on that legislative day in 1834.
No, it simply evolved into a new kind of fight. One that proved that sustained resistance, day-to-day defiance, and amplifying the voices of the oppressed were absolutely required to enforce the true moral intent of emancipation.
The paper declaration was just the starting point.
Exactly.
And that leads us to a powerful thought we want to leave you with, one that connects this history to modern discussions of equity. The entire apprenticeship system was justified as a way to ease the transition.
Right, to teach self-sufficiency.
Given the hardship, the brutality, the economic traps we've talked about, what does this episode reveal about that inherent structural tension between a colonial power determined to maintain economic control and the simple, absolute human demand for unqualified liberty?
And maybe also consider the lasting economic effects. What does it truly mean for a society's foundational equity when people who toiled their entire lives without wages were then forced to spend 4 critical years not building a future, but just struggling to purchase back the very freedom that should have been their birthright?
The legacy of that lost capital that enforced poverty.
Right.
It must stretch far beyond 1838.
It absolutely does.
Something to truly consider as you move through your week and reflect on the true cost of liberty.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more insights from the cutting edge of research and history.